Good morning. Good morning. My name's Owen. I'm an associate pastor here at PAC. And my wife, Amanda, and I, we have 3 kids. The middle one, her name is Rose. If you want to throw that picture up for me, Aaron. Oh, yeah, there we go. So that's Rose. So she's 4. That's from her first day of preschool here at the West Park Children's Center, which she absolutely loves. But this picture is kind of the quintessential Rose. So she is all things pink, all things unicorn, all things rainbow, and just like all your stereotypical girl things, that is Rose to a T. And she's adorable. I'm biased, but she's stinking cute. But thank you. But don't let that deceive you. That little girl is fierce. She is strong. She is incredibly sure of herself, which is a great quality to have in a girl, right? Like, she's going to be an amazing leader one day. It does present some challenges as a parent. So we're partway through January. Most of the Christmas candy and treats are out of the house. There's a few remnants left. But over the Christmas break, at one point I was in the kitchen doing some dishes or something like that, and Rose walked up to me, and she just stared at me and said, "I want some chocolate." Now, Amanda and I, we have kind of this philosophy with the treats around Christmas time that we're like, you know what? Go to town, eat it all as much as you want, because the faster you eat it, the faster it's out of the house. However, this day, Rose, she had already eaten about her body's weight in chocolate. And it was right getting close to supper time, so I was like, you know what, Rose, honey, you've had a lot already, so maybe we'll wait till after supper and then you can have some more. Stares at me blankly. Daddy, I want some chocolate. Like, totally not acknowledging what I said whatsoever. So I reassert, and like, I heard you the first time, I know, and I've already answered, we're going to wait till after supper. But I want it. Yes, I can see that. And from there, it kind of went downhill and degraded into some screaming, wailing, gnashing of teeth, etc., and then culminated in timeout for both of us. As a parent, I don't always give Rose what she wants because I know it's not good for her to eat over her body's weight in chocolate, right? And while usually I like to think that we handle our emotions a little bit better than a 4-year-old sometimes, when we don't get what we want, oftentimes our emotional response will be pretty similar. Now, we may not show it the same way as Rose would, but oftentimes we feel those same emotions, right? Like, we get frustrated, we get angry, some of us get sad and depressed, right? Some of us will like dig our heels in like Rose and just not give any ground. Some of us will go and kind of turtle in the corner. But then, in particular, when we have expectations and things we want from Jesus, it gets really complicated when our emotional responses are tied to him, right? So Amanda and I, we moved here a year and a half ago. Yeah, she's nodding, yes. My math is working. A year and a half ago, and when we moved here, our home hadn't sold yet completely. We had a conditional sale on, but there was a bunch of terms and stuff that had to be cleared on the buyer's end. And so we felt God calling us to come to Portage. And as a part of that, we felt him say to us that he was going to provide for us, that he was going to care for us, and in particular, that he was going to give us a home where we could put down roots. And so we get here in September, our house is still kind of in limbo, we're renting a place, and we're like, okay, here we go, Jesus. Any day now, you can follow through with what you said, let's go. End of September rolls around, and we're still in limbo. At this point, you get a little frustrated, right? Like, okay, this isn't the timeline I would like. I would have liked to have been buying already, but whatever, Jesus, we know you'll still do this. We know you're still good. Okay, we can handle this. And then the end of October rolls around. Okay, a little more frustrated, a little more angry, and the conversations with Jesus shift a little bit to like, okay, what are you doing? Why aren't you giving me what I want here? What's going on? And then November rolls around. And finally, end of December, our home sells and goes through and everything like that. And we're super excited. And so we're like, okay, this is great. Now we can move on. We start looking at more houses and stuff like that because we're preparing to purchase a home. And as we're doing that, we look at our finances again after the sale is totally finalized, and we realize that there is no possible way we're going to be able to buy a home for probably another 7 years. And so we're like, hey, Jesus, what are you doing? We felt like you promised this to us. We felt like it's a good thing. It's what we want, so why aren't you giving us what we want? Jesus doesn't always give us what we want. And that can be frustrating sometimes. Just a little bit. So we're going to read in Mark chapter 10. We're going to start right in verse 1. You can follow along with me in your Bibles if you'd like. It says this: Jesus then left that place and went into the region of Judea and across the Jordan. Again, crowds of people came to him, and as was his custom, he taught them. Some Pharisees came and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" Let's keep going to verse 3. "What did Moses command you?" he replied. They said, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and send her away." Up to verse 5, guys. Thank you. "It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law," Jesus replied. "But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." When they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this. He answered, "Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery." So Jesus doesn't always give us what we want, like an easy text to preach on a Sunday morning. No, as I was looking at next week, it's Kevin's first Sunday to preach up next week, and he gets to talk about babies and kids. Like, are you kidding me? So, before we get into this text, let's just acknowledge a few things. So first, texts like this, Bible verses like this, they're awkward and painful for most of the people in the room. Right? The 10-year study stat is that 39% of all marriages end in divorce. So that means that essentially through either personal experience or the experience as a child or as a friend, everyone in this room has likely experienced divorce in some way, shape, or form. So we all carry the weight of this. The second thing we want to acknowledge is that there are different perspectives in the room right now on divorce. There are some people in the room right now that would say, never under any circumstances do you get a divorce. That divorce would be sin, that it is wrong. It is not what God wants for you. And there are other people in the room right now that would probably say something more along the lines that, you know what, it's messy, but sometimes God's probably okay with divorce. So let's just acknowledge that right now in the room, the person sitting next to you may not be on the same page with you as this. Third thing that we want to acknowledge with this is that whatever position you kind of land on, whether you're at that side or this side or somewhere in the middle, we often come to texts like this trying to get something out of it. We try to justify our own perspective, or we take kind of that hard line or that soft line, and we'll come out of it with these kind of inner dialogues, right? Like at the end of a sermon like this, you could be like, you see, I told you PAC is soft on divorce. They're not holding to the word of God. They're not doing this right. Or you see, I told you PAC hates divorced people. They don't love them. I don't care. Or like, see, I told you Owen kicks kittens in his spare time. I knew it. Right? We come with our preconceived ideas that we're going to try to prove. This morning, I'm going to do my best to not give you that kind of answer or ammunition. especially about the kittens. So let's just agree and acknowledge those things, set them to the side, and let's come to this text together and work through it. So let's go back to verse 1 and read that again. Jesus then left that place and went into the region of Judea and across the Jordan. Again, crowds of people came to him, and as was his custom, he taught them. This is what Jesus does. Some Pharisees came and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" The important word there is tested him. So the Pharisees, they're trying to trap Jesus with a trick question, right? They did not like Jesus. They did not like what he was doing, and so they were constantly trying to get him in trouble. And one of the ways they were planning on doing that was by asking him this specific question, because they figured if they asked Jesus this question and he came out kind of like soft on divorce, that there's a bunch of people that were following him who would probably stop following him, which would help them. On the flip side, they figured if Jesus came down hard on divorce, Herod, the ruler of that region, would probably kill him, because Herod had already done that with John the Baptist. When John the Baptist confronted him about his divorces, Herod had John the Baptist beheaded. So like either way, we win with the way Jesus answered this question. So this isn't a genuine concern. This isn't like a guy coming up to Jesus and being like, "Jesus, my marriage is falling apart. I don't know what to do. Can you help me?" No, this isn't a pastoral question. This is a test. So this isn't a text to proof text from. This isn't a text to prove our point from. This isn't a text to use as a weapon. So let's keep reading in verse 3. "What did Moses command you?" he replied. They said, "Moses permitted a man to write a certificate of divorce and sent her away." So you notice the little shift in language there. Jesus asks what Moses commanded, and the Pharisees respond with what Moses permitted. So Jesus, in asking the question that way, he is asking for an affirmative law. He is asking, what did Moses tell you to do? What did he tell you that is good? And the Pharisees respond with this kind of language of permission, right? Because they know that Moses set a law to minimize the damage and sinful culture that Israel is walking through with divorce and abuse. So culturally at the time, women were more objects than people. And so for Moses, when he was writing this law, he saw that all that the men had to do to leave their wives was literally just kick her out of the house. And in doing so, because of the culture at the time, the woman would likely starve because she had no way to provide for herself. And Moses sees that this is not good and that it's happening constantly among their people. And so he puts in this law that says you can give your wife that you're divorcing this piece of paper, which then says she is allowed to go and remarry and not be accused of adultery, which the penalty for which is stoning to death. And she can go and remarry in good conscience and be provided for. So Moses, he didn't affirm divorce at all, and the Pharisees knew it. So they shift that language a little bit. And in fact, the debate at the time was never really whether or not divorce was good or bad, or if God liked it or if he didn't. The debate at the time, because it was so accepted as the norm between the major rabbis, the major teachers at the time, it was never whether it was good or bad. It was just how far does the line go? And that's always the wrong question. But they would ask, so the major teachers, one rabbi, Shammai, his line was if there was moral failure, you could divorce your wife. So if they committed adultery, or if they just simply didn't follow the Torah the way that you thought she should, you could divorce her. And Hillel, another major rabbi at the time, he took it a little far. And he essentially said, any reason whatsoever that you find fault in your wife, you're done. You can divorce her and send her on her way. The actual quote from Hillel was, if you tell her to go this way and she does not, divorce her. So this is the culture that Moses is writing in these verses to in this law, and it was his attempt to abate the abuse of the system they were living in. And Jesus knows it, and the Pharisees know it. So let's keep reading in verse 5. It was because your hearts were hard that Moses wrote you this law, Jesus replied. But at the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his wife and mother or his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh, so they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. So Jesus, he turns and he points the Pharisees to the brokenness and sinfulness of their culture at that time as the source of divorce. He's saying this law that you're following about divorce, it doesn't actually reflect the heart of God for marriage. It doesn't reflect the identity that God has called you to. And so Jesus, he turns and he points to the original intent for marriage right from creation. He points us back to our identity and calling in God, in who he is calling us to be. He takes a moment and he's calling us to become who we are, because the Pharisees, they were looking at marriage as a contract, as this piece of paper that you signed off on the bottom line and you could renegotiate. And Jesus is saying, no, you're missing it. This isn't a contract, this is covenant. This is an agreement between a husband and a wife and God. This three-braided cord. And it's a life of service and self-sacrifice for the other. It's where I say, I'm going to do my part, and when you don't do your part, I will do your part too. And then God says to us in the midst of that, when you both fail, I'll be there. And so, if you're here this morning, your relationship is struggling, a really good question to ask is, where is God in our relationship? Because it's not just the two of you, it's three. And some of you this morning, you may be here and you may be married, you may be in a relationship, you might be realizing, wait a second, we haven't invited God in. And so maybe, if you're struggling, the first step to correcting what's wrong in your relationship is just inviting Jesus into your relationship. Be like, hey, Jesus, come be a part of this. And Jesus, he doesn't give us what we want, because what he wants for us is so much better than we could imagine. Right? He's saying, no, this divorce, Pharisees, you don't understand. What God's heart is actually this, and it is so much better and is so much grander than what you could possibly think or imagine. For Amanda and I with our house, we were frustrated with God, and we didn't see the whole picture. We didn't get what he was doing. But then through incredible generosity and God's really perfect timing that you cannot fake, we were able to purchase a home this past November. And we, at that point, we were willing to settle. We were willing to buy something that wasn't quite right and just make it work. And he led us to this property that is exactly everything we could want. And it's not some great mansion, but it's perfect for us. And it's more than we hoped for. And when it comes to our relationships, that is in every time with Jesus. He has a picture of what he wants for us. So let's keep reading verse 10. When they were in the house again, the disciples asked Jesus about this. And he answered, anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery against her. And if she divorces her husband and marries another man, she commits adultery. So Jesus does this often. He teaches the disciples the next step further on it. And the logic of these sentences may seem fairly straightforward to us, right? That it's like, yeah, if you do this, it's adultery, yeah, back and forth, the opposite directions, right? For his disciples, this would have been entirely revolutionary. Because at that point, rabbinic law said that the husband could not commit adultery. So if a husband slept with another woman, the woman would be accused of adultery, he would not. To the point where if the man slept with another man's wife, that other man's wife would be committed of adultery, he would not. So the current day equivalent would be if Jesus came and he told you, if you go and sell your car and you go and buy another person's car, you're committing theft. Sorry, pardon? Right? Like this, and in the book of Matthew, the same story, these disciples have exactly that reaction. They're like, this is impossible then. This doesn't make any sense. So this isn't actually a statement where Jesus is accusing of adultery. because there's a ton of stuff going on in the background. And what he's doing is he's actually elevating the status of the wife to being the same as a husband. Where he's saying, your wife is actually valuable. She is actually important to God, the same way that you are important to God. And he brings us onto equal terms. So this isn't a statement where Jesus is accusing of adultery. He repeals kind of this Mosaic provision for divorce, and he says, you're missing the heart of God in this. Jesus, he's arguing for this permanent covenant, beautiful idea of marriage. Bone of bone, flesh of flesh. Jesus is saying, I want marriage to be the sacrificial covenant that it was originally intended to be, and I don't want you to miss this because it is good for you. What you want, that is nothing compared to what I have waiting for you. And when we're struggling in our marriage and looking for a way out, Jesus doesn't just give it to us because he's calling us to something higher, to something better, because he knows what's at the other end of the tunnel and that it is actually good. I'm going to share a little bit of mine and Amanda's story, and I just want to let you know first, Amanda and I had talked about this in advance, and she's okay with me sharing this, not as a sense of like, ha ha ha, funny, Owen got permission, but in the sense that I want to honor her story as well as my story. But Amanda and I, we've been married for 11 and a half years, and it's not been unicorns and rainbows the whole time. We've had a lot of hard years. And in particular, a couple years into marriage, we're in our first ministry position, and we're just miserable. We were just constantly missing each other. We were fighting. We were trying to figure out who we were, what it looked like to be in ministry, what all of this, and a ton of moving parts. And so we were constantly missing each other and hurting each other, to the point where it was like we were having those days where we were having the yelling and screaming down the hallway and slamming the door shut fights, and the dead silent full days where neither of us were going to talk to the other one. And it got to the point where we were done. We were ready to call it quits. And so we were practically taking steps towards divorce. And there was one thing that kept us from taking that last step. We were too poor. Yeah, I know. You were hoping for some high pastoral thing. No. We had accumulated so much student debt and finances were in such a place that we could not afford to get a divorce, so we stuck it out. And I'm so thankful that we did. Because it forced us, we're like, hey, if we're stuck together, then let's figure this out. So we went and got counseling, and we did the legwork, and now Amanda and I look back and we say, what would we have missed if we hadn't? And it's not perfect. Yeah. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, right? Like, we still fight and we still hurt each other, but it's good because a hard thing is not always a bad thing. Now, a lot of you in the room are like, that's great, Owen, but right now my marriage feels more like a dumpster fire than anything else, and I don't know what to do. So a couple of questions that you can ask yourself in the midst of it, and then a couple of things that I think you can do. And I don't have all the answers, and I don't expect that in the next 2 minutes you're going to get those answers. But here's a couple of things that might help. So a couple of questions first to ask yourself in the midst of it. First is ask yourself, what is Jesus teaching me? Because in all of those processes, this is a refining moment for you, an opportunity to grow. So look for what Jesus is teaching you in that moment about yourself, about your spouse, and about your community, and about him. Second thing to ask him is, how is this making me more like Jesus? Because the friction can smooth some of those rough edges and help you, transform you into more like being a person more like Jesus. And the last question, that is the hardest question to ask when you're in the midst of those tension moments, is, how can I serve my spouse? It's an incredibly important question to ask yourself because it changes the position of your heart from how can I get what I want out of this to how can I serve another person? So 3 questions to ask and then 3 things that you can do. First, cheat the front end. Don't cheat on the front end, cheat the front end. So prepare well for marriage. So for those of you in the room that are single, dating, engaged, whatever, prepare well. Make wise choices. Get good premarital counseling. Get mentored by people whose marriages you admire. Set yourself up for success, because if you do it well at the start, it'll only make things better as your relationship grows. It's still not going to be perfect. You're still going to fight in that moments, hate each other probably, but it'll be better. Second thing you can do is fight well. It feels cliche to say it because it's said so often, but fight well. Fight for each other, not against each other. Right? Again, it's that position of the heart thing. Just shifted a little bit to not from what can I get out of this, but how can I fight to make this relationship last? And the last thing is get help. Get help. That's what house church is for. Being centered in a healthy community that will tell you where you need to grow and how you can grow to be a better follower of Jesus and a better husband and a better wife. Help point you to Jesus through the process. And do not be afraid of getting counseling. It's an incredible gift to have a professional come into your relationship and help you sort through a bunch of things. Between Amanda and I's individual sessions and couple sessions, we've probably seen counselors probably 25 different times. Get help. So Jesus doesn't give us what we want. We want the easy answer. We want the easy way out. We want him to affirm what we already believe. But he doesn't give it to us. Because what he wants for us, he knows is far greater than what we could hope for or dream of on our own. And he wants to invite us into a covenant. He wants us to invite us into this promise between our spouses and him. Just like he does at the table. So invite the band out here. So this morning is communion, and we come to the table. And now some of you in the room, despite my best efforts, you may feel like you can't share in this table this morning. Some of you may be in the spot where it's like, you know what, Owen, we didn't get the clear-cut answer. I don't know if I can share this table with them. I don't know if I can believe the same things that they believe. And some of us in the room right now, you're feeling some guilt and shame. You're like, I don't know if I'm welcome. I don't know if Jesus welcomes me or if Pac welcomes me. This isn't a pastoral text. This isn't Jesus' marriage counseling. This is Jesus' table. This is the table of the same Jesus who sees the woman at the well who has been married and divorced 5 times and is sleeping with another man and says, come to the kingdom. This is the table of the same Jesus who sees the woman who is caught in adultery and stops her from being stoned and says, go and sin no more. So wherever you're at right now, Jesus is inviting you into this covenant relationship with him, and he is saying, come, meet with me. So I'd invite you to come to the table. You can come up to the front, grab a cracker and some juice, and go back to your seat. And after the band's played through this song, we'll take it together. Thank you. So this is Christ's body that was broken for you. Let's take this together in remembrance of him. And this cup is his blood that was poured out for you for the new covenant that he wanted to invite you to be a part of. Let's take this together. Thank you for joining us this morning. You can go in God's peace. If you are processing things and you need some prayer, the prayer team is going to be up front and is willing to meet with you. Thank you. Go in God's peace.